They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from blood, but nothing prepared me for this. My only daughter, the child I raised alone, married without me there, yet demanded the keys to my beach house for her honeymoon. In her eyes, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was just a gatekeeper to her inheritance. Greed, pride, and cold ambition had swallowed her whole, and with a single phone call, she erased decades of sacrifice. But I didn't fight. I didn't beg. Instead, I planned a gift so devastating that it would make her new husband scream until his throat burned. I used to believe my mornings were sacred, stitched together by the quiet rituals that kept me sane. At 67, life had slowed into something gentle, even comforting. I would wake up to the smell of salt from the ocean drifting through my open windows, pad into the kitchen, and pour myself a cup of coffee strong enough to shake the sleep out of my bones. Then I'd sit by the wide bay window that overlooked the endless stretch of beach, pen in hand, and write a few words to my late husband, Mark. Sometimes it was just a memory. Other times it was a confession. I never had the courage to tell him when he was alive. That journal became my companion, and the sea my witness. But none of it ever mattered as much as Rachel. My daughter wasn't just my pride. She was my life's purpose. Raising her alone after Mark's death nearly broke me, yet it also gave me a reason to keep breathing when grief tried to crush me. She had been such a radiant child, bright, ambitious, with a smile that felt like sunlight. I poured every ounce of myself into her future. Late nights helping with school projects, double shifts to pay for college, endless prayers whispered into the ocean breeze. Watching her succeed was the one thing that made all those sacrifices worth it. Rachel grew into the kind of woman everyone admired. Successful, beautiful, always put together. Even now, when I thought about her, my chest swelled with pride. She was preparing for her wedding, something I once believed I would be at the very center of, perhaps even walking her down the aisle in place of her father. That dream had kept me going through lonely nights. The house itself carried our family's history. Mark had built much of it with his own hands, sanding the wood until it gleamed, painting the walls the shade of pale cream Rachel once said reminded her of seashells. To me, it wasn't just a home. It was a living monument of love. Every creak in the floorboards, every photograph hanging crookedly in the hallway was soaked with our memories. And Rachel had always said, "Mom, one day I'll bring my own children here, and we'll keep this house alive together." Those words lived in me like scripture. Yet as the wedding drew closer, something in her tone shifted. Calls grew shorter. Visits became rare. She brushed me off with polite excuses. "Work is busy, Mom," or "We'll catch up soon." I told myself not to read too much into it. After all, young women had their own lives, but a mother knows. I noticed her glances at her phone during the rare lunches we shared, the way she cut the conversation short if David, her fiancé, texted. David. He was polite, always polite. He shook my hand firmly, brought flowers the first time he visited, and complimented the view of the house as if he were evaluating it more than admiring it. There was a calculating edge to his eyes, though he hid it beneath well-practiced charm. He would look around the house with the kind of interest that made me uneasy, as though he were appraising something that could be his. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling clung to me. Rachel didn't see it, or maybe she didn't want to. She smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in years, as if he were the anchor to her future. That should have comforted me, but instead it made me feel displaced, like there was less room for me in her world now that David had claimed a part of it. One evening, after she left my place abruptly, I lingered by the window and watched the tide roll in. I replayed her words in my head. Quick, clipped, dismissive. She had brushed off my question about the wedding with a vague, "We're still working on it, Mom, don't worry." But her voice carried something brittle, something that didn't match her smile. As the waves slapped against the shore, I felt a chill creep through me, not from the wind, but from the silence that stretched between us. Something was shifting, pulling her further away from me. I wrote in my journal that night. I don't recognize the distance in her eyes. It feels like I'm being left out of something important, but I'm too afraid to admit it. What if I'm losing her? And maybe that's where the first seed of dread was planted. You know that feeling when someone you love starts to keep secrets, but you can't bear to confront them? It's easier to pretend nothing is wrong, easier to convince yourself it's just your imagination. That's what I told myself, over and over, even as my heart whispered otherwise. I didn't realize it then, but the cracks had already begun to spread, and soon the life I thought was steady as the ocean tides would break apart in ways I couldn't imagine. I never expected my daughter, the child I once held as she promised never to leave me, to turn me into a guest in my own life. The morning it happened, the ocean looked deceptively calm. I had just finished my coffee and was absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone when the images appeared. Bright, polished, unavoidable. Rachel in a flowing white gown, beaming with a smile so wide it hurt me to look at. David stood beside her in his sharp black suit, his hand pressed proudly against her waist. Around them, a sea of faces. Friends, distant relatives, even colleagues I barely knew. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of engagement party, maybe a rehearsal dinner. Surely my daughter would never hold her wedding without telling me. But as I swiped through photo after photo, the truth wrapped around my throat like a tightening noose. The bouquet toss, the kiss at the altar, the reception dance. This wasn't a prelude, this was the whole story. And I hadn't even been written in as a footnote. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The room spun around me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I pressed Rachel's contact and lifted the phone to my ear, half hoping she'd laugh and tell me it was a misunderstanding. Her voice, when she answered, was cold, clipped, unrecognizable. "Rachel," I stammered. "When was the wedding? Why didn't you—" She cut me off. "We already got married, Mom. We only invited people who really matter. Just send the beach house keys and stop being so dramatic." It was as if someone had reached into my chest and ripped me open. Her words sliced deeper than any knife ever could. People who really matter. After everything I had done, every night I had worked myself raw to give her a future, I didn't matter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how she could erase me from the most important day of her life. But instead, something inside me froze. I smiled, though tears blurred my eyes. She couldn't see it, of course, but I smiled all the same. Not the smile she remembered from her childhood when I clapped at her school plays or celebrated her college acceptance. No, this was different. Tight, bitter, edged with something she wouldn't recognize yet. And I hung up. For a long time, I just sat there in the silence, phone still in my hand, the sound of waves crashing against the shore muffled as though the world itself had grown distant. My body shook, not with cold, but with the shock of betrayal settling into my bones. I went through the stages like a storm. First came disbelief. No, she wouldn't do this to me. Not Rachel, not my baby. Then came hurt so sharp it doubled me over. A physical ache that hollowed out my chest. Anger followed swiftly, pulsing hot in my veins, making me want to tear the photos from my screen, as if shredding them could change reality. And finally, emptiness, a vast, consuming void where my love and pride had once lived. I moved through the house like a ghost. I tried washing dishes, folding laundry, anything to ground myself, but every mundane task only reminded me of her absence. This home had been her sanctuary, every corner touched by her laughter, and now she wanted the keys as if I were just a caretaker, a gatekeeper to her inheritance. That night, I opened my journal and stared at the blank page for hours. Words failed me. All I could see was Rachel at 6 years old, climbing into my lap, her arms wrapped around my neck as she whispered, "Mom, I'll never leave you. I'll always need you." The memory shattered me. I pressed my hand against my chest as if I could physically hold my heart together, but it was already in pieces. The betrayal wasn't just about a wedding. It was the erasure of my place in her life, the denial of every sacrifice I had ever made. She had cast me aside, reduced me to nothing more than a set of house keys. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of it settle fully. I thought the wound Rachel had dealt me was the cruelest thing a child could do to her mother. I thought this was the end of the pain. But I was wrong. This was only the beginning. The days after the phone call blurred into one long haze. I moved through my routines as if on autopilot, coffee, journal, staring out at the waves, yet inside, I was hollow. Betrayal clung to me like damp salt air, impossible to shake off. Then one afternoon, I walked into the study where Rachel had borrowed my old laptop weeks ago. She must have forgotten to log out of her email. At first, I hesitated. It felt like trespassing into her private world, but something deeper pushed me forward. Something born from the crack in my heart she had carved wide open. My fingers hovered before clicking into the inbox, and then I saw it. An email thread between her and David. The subject line, "Ownership Strategy, Beach House." My stomach twisted as I read the words. David's tone was clinical, almost like he was drawing up a business plan. He wrote about how the beach house could be reallocated once Rachel convinced me to hand over the keys. They discussed legal loopholes, inheritance laws, even the possibility of having me sign over the deed under the guise of estate planning. Rachel's replies were colder than I ever thought she was capable of. "She won't resist," one line read. "Mom still thinks she's important to me. She'll give in if I make it sound like it's for my future." The words blurred, and I had to blink to clear the sting in my eyes. In that moment, the truth hit me with merciless clarity. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an obstacle, a door she had to unlock, nothing more. Suddenly, all those little moments from the past few months fell into place. Her subtle questions about my will, David's lingering looks at the foundation of the house, as if calculating its value, the clipped answers, the hidden calls, the way she avoided my eyes when I asked about the wedding. None of it had been coincidence. It was all a plan. I closed the laptop with trembling hands, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. My heart screamed for me to confront her, to demand an explanation, but my mind whispered something else. Watch. Learn. Don't show your hand yet. And so I sat there in the silence, wondering, what would you do if you discovered your own flesh and blood was plotting to push you out of your home? Would you rage? Would you weep? Or would you wait like I chose to? The answer wasn't simple because the pain wasn't simple. I wanted to hate her, but hate doesn't grow in a heart that once beat for someone's survival. Love still lingered, poisoned and fragile. Days later, I took the documents I had found to my lawyer. The office smelled of leather and old paper, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. I slid the printed emails across the desk, and he studied them with the same gravity a doctor gives to bad news. "This isn't the first inquiry she's made," he said after checking his files. "Rachel came to me months ago asking about transfer of property rights. She wanted to know how quickly assets could change hands if you weren't around anymore." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. "You mean if I died?" I whispered. He didn't answer, but the silence said enough. On the way home, the air felt heavier than usual. Each step toward the beach house felt like walking through quicksand. My daughter, my pride, had been rehearsing a future where I no longer existed, not metaphorically, but legally, tangibly. I dug deeper, following paper trails I never thought I'd need to. Financial records showed David drowning in debt, unpaid loans, credit cards stretched beyond their limits. The beach house wasn't just a dream getaway to them, it was a lifeline, a salvation purchased with my erasure, and that realization cut sharper than the betrayal itself. Because suddenly, I saw Rachel not only as greedy, but as a woman ensnared by a man's failures, her ambition, Her coldness, it had David's fingerprints all over it. That night, I sat on the porch staring at the horizon, the journal closed on my lap. The sunset bled red into the sea, and for the first time I couldn't find words to describe what I felt. Anger and sorrow twisted together, impossible to separate. I remembered Rachel at 10 years old, running barefoot along this same shore, hair flying, eyes bright. She had tripped and scraped her knee, and when I carried her back inside, she clung to me like I was the only safe place in the world. That memory haunted me, colliding with the woman she had become. I should hate her. I should plan her downfall with the same cold precision she had planned mine, but my heart betrayed me once more, whispering the truth I couldn't escape. She was still my daughter, and that, perhaps, was the cruelest twist of all. The more I searched, the darker the truth became. I had thought the emails were enough to crush me, but then I stumbled across something worse. In a folder tucked away in Rachel's laptop, hidden under innocuous names, I found a document labeled Future Planning. My hands shook as I opened it, my pulse drumming in my ears. It was a memorandum, drawn up with David's meticulous, sterile language. He laid out step by step how they could transition me out of the beach house. Phase 1, establish narrative of dependency. Phase 2, secure mother's consent to transfer ownership. Phase 3, relocate mother to secondary property or assisted living. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Relocate mother. It was as if I wasn't Helen Parker, a woman with dreams, grief, and a beating heart. I was just mother, a chess piece to be moved off the board. And then came the part that hollowed me out entirely. Once assets are secured, reallocate retirement funds to clear debt and secure family future. They weren't just after the house. They were after everything. My savings, the little nest egg I had built through decades of work, the money that was supposed to carry me through my final years with dignity. My daughter and her husband weren't planning to share a future with me. They were planning a future without me, funded by what I had bled for. I collapsed into the chair, the paper trembling in my grip. The house was silent except for the pounding of my heart. For a long while, I just sat there, numb, until finally the tears came. They weren't the tears of a woman wounded once. They were the tears of someone gutted again and again, each betrayal carving deeper. I stumbled into the living room where Mark's photograph sat on the mantel. His face, forever frozen in the warmth of youth, stared back at me with eyes that once promised safety. I clutched the frame and whispered through sobs. Did we raise her wrong, Mark? Did we give too much? Did I blind myself with love so completely that I couldn't see this coming? The house gave no answer. Only the sea roared outside, as if mocking me for believing love could shield me from greed. Yet amid the grief, something else stirred. A flicker of defiance, a stubborn ember of dignity. I wiped my eyes and stood straighter, placing the photograph gently back in its place. If Rachel and David thought I would be an easy mark, they had underestimated the years I had spent surviving loss and hardship. I would not beg. I would not scream. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I would play the role they least expected, the silent architect of their undoing. I began quietly gathering documents, deeds, financial statements, legal papers I had tucked away. What they didn't know was that months earlier, when Rachel first began making those subtle inquiries about inheritance, something inside me had already shifted. I had gone to my lawyer then, unsettled but unwilling to admit my suspicions, and made a decision. I had donated the beach house to a charitable trust in Mark's name, legally binding, airtight. The house they coveted no longer belonged to me. It never would belong to them. Now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to reveal it, not with shouting or confrontation, but with quiet precision, the kind of strike that leaves no room for recovery. I sat at my desk that night and began to write. My hand shook as I drafted the letter, each word laced with both love and finality. It was a message to Rachel, though I knew she wouldn't understand it until too late. "You wanted the keys," I wrote. "Here they are. But understand, the door you seek will never open for you." I folded the letter and placed it inside a plain envelope. Then I gathered the legal documents, copies of the trust agreement, notarized and sealed. Together, they became something more than paperwork. They became my gift, my weapon, my answer to their greed. If they wanted a wedding present, I would give them one. Not wrapped in bows or glittering paper, but in truth, sharp enough to cut. As I sealed the envelope, a calm I hadn't felt in weeks washed over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt in control. And I whispered to the empty room, to Mark's silent photograph, "If they want the keys, I'll give them. But not the keys they're waiting for." 3 days after the wedding, I woke to a sky the color of steel. The air smelled heavy, like the storm that was brewing had been waiting for me to act. I gathered the envelope, the documents, and the letter I had written with trembling hands and placed them in a plain white box. No ribbons, no flowers, no delicate wrapping, only truth waiting to explode. I drove into the city with the box resting quietly on the passenger seat. My fingers clenched tight around the steering wheel. Every mile I traveled, memories of Rachel flashed through my mind, her first steps across this very sand, her laughter in the back seat during road trips, the way she once said, "Mom, you're my whole world." Now those memories were ghosts, haunting me even as I prepared to deliver the most devastating gift a mother could give. When I reached their apartment building, I parked across the street. The lobby was decorated with balloons and wilted flowers from the wedding, as if the celebration had spilled into every corner of their lives. I slipped inside, unnoticed, and climbed the stairs to their door. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady as I placed the box down and slid the envelope beneath the ribbon securing it. No knocking, no ringing the bell, just silence. I turned and walked away, my heels echoing softly down the hallway. I didn't wait for them to open it. I didn't need to. Halfway down the stairwell, the first sound pierced the air. A sharp cry, guttural, raw. David's voice shattering the calm like glass breaking in an empty cathedral. "What is this?" His scream ricocheted off the walls, louder, angrier with every word he spat. I didn't stop walking. I reached the bottom of the stairs, pushed open the glass door, and let the cold air swallow me whole. Behind me, I could still hear them. Rachel's voice rose, cracking with disbelief. No, it can't be. This isn't real." David's fury followed. "The house is gone, the trust, everything. It's not hers to give us. It never was. We have nothing." I paused on the sidewalk, closing my eyes, the ocean of sound crashing behind me. A strange calm settled in my chest. I had expected to feel triumph, maybe even vindication. Instead, what I felt was something quieter, a release. Upstairs, chaos unfolded. Rachel sobbed uncontrollably, her voice torn between rage and heartbreak. David cursed, pacing, hurling accusations at her for promising him security she could never deliver. What had once been their shared fantasy now collapsed into shards of blame. "You told me she would give it to us," David roared. "You told me she trusted you, that she was weak." "I thought she would," Rachel cried. "I thought she loved me enough." Her words broke off, swallowed by her own sobbing, their voices tangled in the storm of their unraveling, a duet of greed and regret. And I realized then that the punishment was not mine to deliver. It was theirs to inflict on each other. But my gift hadn't ended with the trust documents. I had slipped in one final blow, the financial statement proving David's debt, now tethered irrevocably to Rachel because of the marriage license she had so proudly signed. She hadn't just lost the house. She had inherited his ruin. It was a cruel truth, and it twisted in my chest even as I thought of it. Part of me wanted to take it back, to shield her from the avalanche she had brought upon herself. But another part knew this was the only way she would ever understand the cost of betrayal. I reached my car and leaned against the hood, the cold metal grounding me as another scream echoed above. This one was Rachel's, high, raw, almost animal in its grief. The sound cut through me, and for a brief moment my knees nearly buckled. This wasn't victory, it was survival. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and let the engine roar to life. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just unraveled. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't need to see the wreckage I had left behind. I knew their world was splintering, their love collapsing under the weight of greed and lies. As I drove away, the storm finally broke, rain lashing against the windshield. I let it blur the world outside, washing everything into shades of gray. I whispered to myself, to the empty car, to the memory of the daughter I once knew, "You wanted the keys. Now you have them. But the door you sought will never open." And with that, I left behind not just their screams, but the last remnants of the illusion that Rachel was still the little girl who once promised never to leave me. Months slipped by like waves dissolving against the shore. The storm of that day, with its screams and shattering illusions, receded into memory, though the echo of it still lingered in my chest. I had left the beach house behind and moved into a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was smaller, simpler, but it was mine. No shadows of betrayal haunted these walls. I could breathe here. I could wake to the smell of fresh coffee without choking on the bitterness of loss. Freedom had a strange texture. At first it felt like loneliness, like absence. I missed the sound of the ocean through the window, the creak of old floorboards beneath my feet. But over time, those absences became space, room to grow, to find myself again beyond the title of mother. I joined a book club, walked to the farmer's market on Saturdays, even struck up conversations with neighbors who invited me for tea. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was steady, honest, and mine to shape. And then Rachel appeared at my door. It was a rainy afternoon, the sky weeping in steady streams, when the knock came. I opened it to find her standing there, soaked, her hair plastered to her face. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and for a moment she looked like the little girl I used to hold after nightmares. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. Please, forgive me." The sight of her twisted something inside me. My heart wanted to run forward, to pull her into my arms and erase everything. But the memory of her words, "people who really matter," burned fresh in my ears. I stepped back, letting her inside. But I didn't embrace her. She collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking. "David left," she choked out. "He blamed me for everything, for losing the house, for the debts. He said I ruined his life. But it was me, Mom. I ruined mine. I ruined us." Tears filled my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Rachel, I love you. I always have. But love doesn't mean letting someone walk over me, not even you." She sobbed harder, clutching at my hand as though it were the last lifeline she had. I thought losing the house would kill me, but it didn't. What kills me is knowing I lost you. That was the final twist, sharper than any before. The realization that the true loss wasn't brick and wood, but the bond between us. We sat in silence for a long while, mother and daughter, bound by love yet separated by choices that could never be undone. It was not reconciliation, not yet. It was recognition, the fragile beginning of something new, or perhaps the quiet acknowledgement of what could never return. In the days that followed, I reflected often. Once I had been the victim, blindsided, discarded, betrayed. But now I stood taller, not because I had punished Rachel, but because I had refused to let greed define me. I had taken control of my story. I thought about all the women like me, mothers who had given everything only to be told they no longer mattered. And I wanted to tell them, "You do matter. Your worth is not measured by the keys you hold or the inheritance others covet. Your worth is written in the years you survived, in the love you gave freely, even when it wasn't returned. So I share this now, not just as my story, but as a warning and a lesson. Family is precious, yes, but love without boundaries is a chain, and chains will drag you under. If you ever find yourself betrayed by the very blood you nurtured, ask yourself, will you let them erase you, or will you stand? Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't a courtroom or a confrontation. Sometimes it's the silent act of walking away, leaving behind the screams, and building a life that is yours alone. And sometimes the most powerful sound of all is silence.